2015. Rural Jefferson County, Wisconsin. Picture a deserted gravel road called Inland Road, ending in a dead end, surrounded by open countryside. A local resident was out for a simple walk when he wandered toward a tree line. About 20 feet off the roadway, he spotted something light-colored, hidden in the thick brush. He took a closer look and realized he was staring at a human skull. Law enforcement arrived and secured the area. Forensic investigators carefully cleared the site and uncovered a complete skeleton. The remains had been exposed to the elements for a very long time, but one unusual detail immediately caught the experts' attention. The bones were positioned in a highly unnatural, twisted posture. It looked as if the body had been forcefully compressed into a small rectangular container or bag before being discarded. There were no scraps of clothing, no personal belongings, and no identification anywhere nearby. At the forensic lab, dental specialists compared dental records and quickly reached a definitive identification. The remains belonged to Kelly Dwyer, a 27-year-old woman who had vanished without a trace 19 months earlier. And that brings us to the question at the center of this entire story. How did a successful, outgoing woman from the busy city of Milwaukee end up abandoned in a remote rural area 40 miles from home? Investigators found virtually no clues at the recovery site. The only thing that stood out was the unusual position of her remains. To understand what happened, we need to rewind the clock and take a closer look at who Kelly really was. Let's go back to 2012, when Milwaukee's fast-paced energy was just beginning to pull Kelly into its orbit. Part of the reason she moved there traced back to a difficult chapter in her family's history. When Kelly was 16, her parents went through a painful divorce. The split hit her hard and left her struggling to find stability. It took years to adjust. Moving to Milwaukee became both an escape and an opportunity to build a new life from the ground up. At first, everything seemed to be falling into place. Kelly landed a solid position at the well-known athletic apparel retailer Lululemon. She had more than enough energy to keep several projects going at once. Alongside her full-time job, she worked shifts as a yoga instructor and also picked up babysitting jobs for extra income. Meeting new people came naturally to her. She loved being around friends, enjoyed a lively social scene, and quickly became a familiar face around town. She spent a lot of time at a local spot called Allium, where she regularly met up with friends and acquaintances. She stayed in close contact with her father, often sharing updates about her career, her accomplishments, and the ambitious plans she had for the future. From the outside, Kelly appeared to be exactly where she wanted to be: successful, social, and building the life she had worked hard to create. But let's be realistic for a second. Most of us filter what we tell our families, right? And Kelly was no exception. There was another side to her daily life that her family knew very little about. Alongside work and fitness, her schedule regularly included late-night parties. Alcohol was a constant part of those nights, and from time to time, there were experiments with prohibited substances, including cocaine. She was also highly active on dating apps like OkCupid and Tinder, frequently setting up private meetups with new men. What makes that detail stand out is the fact that she was already involved in a long-term relationship. So why spend so much time on dating apps when you're already seeing a successful, established man? It's a contradiction that investigators would later struggle to fully explain. The central figure in the stories Kelly shared with her father was 38-year-old Chris Zacco. Compared to the random men she met online, Chris seemed like the perfect catch. He was a successful information technology executive at a major corporation and had previously worked in the technology department for the New York Yankees. Financially secure, highly educated, and polished in every social setting. He projected the image of someone who had everything under control. His lifestyle matched that image. Chris lived in a luxury apartment on the 18th floor of an upscale building in Milwaukee's prestigious East Side neighborhood. The property functioned almost like a private fortress for wealthy residents. Entry was tightly controlled, parking was secured, and nearly every corner of the building was monitored electronically. 28 security cameras continuously recorded activity throughout the property. Chris drove a stylish Audi, wore designer clothing, and gave off an unmistakable sense of stability and success. Kelly openly told friends how invested she was in the relationship. She often spoke proudly to her father about Chris, saying he reminded her of him in many ways: steady, dependable, and grounded. When she talked about him, there was a clear sense that she saw a future together. But how often does a polished image hide a completely different reality? Kelly was seeing exactly what she was allowed to see. At the time, she had no idea she might be stepping into a situation far more complicated than it appeared. Her friends were convinced that her feelings for Chris were genuine. She put real effort into the relationship and never tried to hide how much she cared about him. But the people closest to her were starting to question whether that level of commitment went both ways. Chris was direct about his position. He told Kelly that he wasn't interested in serious commitments or long-term plans. What he wanted was a casual relationship with no expectations and no promises about a shared future. As Kelly tried to adapt to the rules of this relationship, people around her began noticing changes that were becoming harder to ignore. Her friends repeatedly saw the same thing: dark bruises appearing on her neck. Naturally, the people closest to her started asking questions. They couldn't just overlook something like that forever. But whenever the subject came up, Kelly brushed it off. Instead of opening up about what was happening, she laughed it away. She blamed the marks on another wild night out, made a joke, and quickly changed the subject before anyone could press further. Now think about this for a moment. How long can someone maintain the image of a successful, carefree bachelor when every day carries the risk of that image completely falling apart? As investigators would later learn, Chris was living an extraordinarily complicated double life. And to understand just how extensive it was, we need to go back a few years. 3 years before Kelly moved to Milwaukee, in 2009, Chris began a serious long-term relationship with another woman named Megan. For 4 years, Megan believed she was his only committed partner. She genuinely saw him as a dependable companion and was making plans for a future together. She spent countless evenings with him, never realizing that other women were also coming and going from the same luxury apartment she thought was part of their shared life. Chris managed to keep those worlds completely separate, but having a long-term girlfriend who didn't know the full story was only a small part of what investigators would eventually uncover. Let's go back even further. It's 2011. The information technology executive meets another woman through an online classified advertising website. In official case records, she is identified only as Miss C. The relationship began as an arrangement centered around a very specific type of consensual, intimate activity. Years later, Miss C would share details with investigators that raised serious concerns. According to her account, Chris insisted on highly restrictive scenarios involving restraint and intense control over breathing. The purpose of these private encounters was to push his partner close to the point of oxygen deprivation. The agreement was simple. If she began experiencing serious difficulty breathing, she would give a clear physical signal, and he was expected to stop immediately. But according to Miss C, those boundaries gradually stopped being respected. The situations repeatedly escalated beyond what had been agreed upon. During some of these encounters, She said she found herself genuinely struggling to break free. Panic would set in, and she would use every bit of strength she had just to create enough space to take a normal breath. Eventually, she became convinced that these encounters could end in disaster if they continued. She felt that her safety was being ignored in favor of Chris's personal interests and preferences. In 2012, Miss C ended all contact with him. When she walked away, she directly accused him of coercive and aggressive behavior. Now left alone with his darker interests, Chris began looking for someone new. Someone more willing to go along with his rules. Someone who would accept the conditions he set and quietly explain away the bruises on her neck to friends who had no idea what was really happening. Let's move to October 2013. This is where the carefully constructed image of a successful life begins to crack. On Saturday, October 12th, Kelly unexpectedly fails to show up for her morning shift. For her coworkers, that immediately raises alarms. Kelly was known for being extremely reliable. She was always on time and never missed work without letting someone know in advance. Concerned, several coworkers decide not to wait around. They head straight to her apartment, but her roommate can only offer a troubling answer. Kelly hasn't been home since Thursday night. Her phone is turned off. There is no activity on any of her social media accounts. As soon as Kelly's mother learns this, she contacts authorities and files an official missing persons report. The search is now underway. Investigators immediately begin reconstructing Kelly's last known movements. By interviewing friends and acquaintances, they establish a clear timeline. On Thursday evening, Kelly spent time at her favorite bar. Later that night, she headed to Chris's apartment. Naturally, detectives make Chris one of their first stops, and this is where things get interesting. Chris appears remarkably calm. He shows no visible aggression, no unusual nervousness, and no hesitation when speaking with investigators. In fact, he openly confirms that Kelly was with him that night. According to his account, the evening was completely routine. They had drinks, used prohibited substances, and later spent time together privately. Chris says that afterward, they fell asleep on opposite ends of the living room couch. The next morning, sometime around 9 o'clock, he claims Kelly got up, gathered her things, and left the apartment while he remained asleep. To support his story, he adds one specific detail. He says that while drifting in and out of sleep, he distinctly heard the sound of the front door opening and closing. At first glance, it sounds like a reasonable explanation. People part ways every day. Detectives hear stories like this all the time. But then, investigators remember exactly what kind of property they're dealing with. Remember that luxury apartment building on Milwaukee's East Side? This wasn't just another apartment complex. It was essentially a heavily secured residential fortress, packed with surveillance technology and security systems. Detectives obtain official access to footage from all 28 security cameras throughout the property. As they review recordings from Thursday night, they find clear confirmation of part of Chris's story. There is Kelly and Chris entering the brightly lit lobby together. They appear relaxed. They're smiling, exchanging glances, and walking side by side toward the elevators. In that footage, Kelly looks completely comfortable and entirely unaware that anything is wrong. Then investigators turn their attention to Friday morning. This is where the case takes a dramatic turn. Detectives sit down in front of their monitors, synchronize the timestamps from every available camera, and begin reviewing the footage frame by frame. They check every possible route leading out of the building: the main entrance, the emergency stairwells, the service corridors, the underground parking garage exits. Nothing is overlooked. Hour after hour, they work through the recordings. And do you know what all that surveillance footage reveals? Absolutely nothing. Kelly never appears on a single camera. not at the 9 o'clock departure time Chris described. Not at 10. Not later that afternoon. Not that evening. Now stop and think about that for a second. It is physically impossible to leave a building like this without being captured by at least one of the many working cameras covering the property. Yet Kelly is nowhere to be found. It's as if she vanished while still on the 18th floor. Faced with that undeniable technological reality, detectives come to a troubling conclusion. The entire story about hearing the apartment door open and close that morning was a calculated lie. Kelly never walked out of that apartment, at least not on her own. Now investigators face a major obstacle. How do they legally get inside a luxury residence when all they have is a missing persons report and no direct evidence of a crime? The justice system requires probable cause before a full-scale search can take place. And that's when Chris makes the first major mistake of the investigation. He hands detectives the key himself. During his initial interview, Chris openly admits that he and Kelly used prohibited substances that night. That single admission changes everything. A judge quickly signs a search warrant. Officially, it isn't connected to Kelly's disappearance. Instead, it is issued based on suspected possession of illegal substances. Investigators enter the upscale apartment and quickly find exactly what the warrant allows them to search for. Inside, they discover a substantial collection of prohibited substances and related items. Cocaine, marijuana stored inside the refrigerator, prescription medications, various smoking devices. Chris is immediately taken into custody and transported for questioning. You might expect someone in that position to be nervous. After all, his girlfriend has disappeared under highly suspicious circumstances, and now he's sitting in a holding cell. But the arrest doesn't seem to shake him at all. According to investigators, Chris remains remarkably relaxed. He behaves less like a person facing serious scrutiny and more like someone attending a routine business meeting. He chats casually with detectives. At one point, he even jokes about how much he enjoys building Lego sets. What stands out most is the complete lack of concern he shows for Kelly's disappearance. No visible anxiety, no urgency, no apparent empathy. Then the conversation shifts. Detectives begin asking more detailed questions about the timeline of that night. And suddenly, the easygoing attitude disappears. The moment the questions become more specific, Chris stops talking. He requests an attorney and immediately ends the interview. While he remains in custody, investigators obtain legal authorization to examine the contents of his cell phone. What they uncover completely shatters the image of the polished, respectable executive he had worked so hard to project. Hidden within the device is a digital archive documenting events that took place just weeks before Kelly disappeared. And for investigators, those files become impossible to ignore. The material investigators discovered on the phone was deeply disturbing. In a series of photographs, Kelly is seen lying on a bed with her wrists and ankles restrained using ordinary men's neckties. The videos reveal what investigators later described as controlled breath restriction activity. Kelly appears to be struggling for air and, at certain moments, looks completely unresponsive. Meanwhile, Chris's calm voice can be heard in the background, repeatedly instructing her to breathe through her nose in an effort to ease the physical reaction. These recordings were made on a different date, long before Kelly disappeared. But for investigators, they served as powerful evidence that these risky practices had never stopped. At this point, the picture investigators were putting together looked increasingly troubling. Even so, they still needed fresh physical evidence from the apartment itself. A specially trained detection dog was brought in to assist with the search. This wasn't a random sweep of the property. The dog had been trained to identify scents associated with human remains. As handlers guided the animal through the apartment, it began giving clear and consistent alerts. First in the hallway, then in Chris's bedroom, and finally inside the guest bathroom. But what happened next caught investigators completely off guard. The handlers led the dog outside the apartment. Almost immediately, it picked up a trail. The animal moved with confidence through the shared hallway and guided investigators directly to the trash chute on the 18th floor. From there, it continued tracking the scent all the way to the building's waste compaction room on the lowest level. For detectives, that path spoke volumes without saying a single word. The evidence suggested that Kelly had not simply walked out of the building. Something significant had happened inside those walls. Now investigators were faced with a new puzzle. How could someone remove a body from a heavily monitored luxury apartment complex without being captured by dozens of security cameras? And why had several large household items disappeared from the apartment shortly after Chris's arrest? News of the arrest spread quickly across Milwaukee. Local television stations covered the story non-stop, and reports about the disturbing material recovered from Chris's devices generated intense public attention. That media coverage soon produced an important breakthrough. Megan, the woman who had spent 4 years believing she was Chris's only serious partner, walked into the police station voluntarily. After learning about his double life and seeing the headlines for herself, she agreed to cooperate fully with investigators. Detectives showed her a series of photographs taken inside the apartment immediately after the arrest. Megan knew those rooms extremely well. She had spent years there and noticed changes almost immediately. As she carefully examined photographs of the guest bathroom, one detail stood out. The metal rings hanging above the bathtub were still there, but the heavy waterproof shower curtain that had always been attached to them was gone. It had completely disappeared, and it wasn't the only missing item. A set of decorative towels was missing as well. So were the fabric bath mats that had previously been on the floor. To Megan, those weren't minor details. They were items she knew had been there before. And now, at the exact moment investigators were searching for answers, they were nowhere to be found. Then her attention turns to the photos of the living room. Megan points out that a large item is missing. For the past several weeks, a big, rigid travel bag used for carrying golf clubs had been sitting in the hallway. It was so bulky that people constantly had to step around it. Now the floor was completely clear. Let's use common sense here. Is it really a coincidence that after a woman spends the night at his apartment, Chris suddenly does a full cleanup of the guest bathroom and gets rid of a massive sports travel case at the same time? The answer is pretty obvious. Now detectives have something specific to work with, the size and shape of an item that could potentially have been used to move a person out of the building. They immediately seize the Audi parked in the garage and bring in a detection dog. The trained dog begins a careful sweep around the glossy black car. The reaction comes almost immediately. First, the dog gives a clear alert near the handle of the left rear door. Then, it gives a strong, unmistakable alert at the trunk. That vehicle had definitely come into contact with the scent investigators were searching for. Now, they needed to figure out the logistics and the route. Analysts pull the credit card records and begin reconstructing Saturday minute by minute. The same day, Kelly's co-workers were already calling hospitals and medical examiners' offices, trying to find her. And what they find is striking. That morning, Chris starts his car and drives about 80 miles out of Milwaukee. His destination? A store called the Mouse House. There, he pays for a piece of cheese. Later, during questioning, he would try to explain the strange road trip by saying he wanted to bring a gift to the parents of the girlfriend he had been deceiving. But the most interesting part happens on the way back. The transactions show that he stops at a sporting goods chain and buys himself a brand new pair of sneakers. So why would someone urgently replace their shoes in the middle of a drive? Investigators did not believe this was random shopping, because if you had just walked through loose forest soil while moving something heavy, your soles would likely carry dirt, trace material, or something even more incriminating. Getting rid of the old shoes and buying new ones would be a logical step if someone were trying to eliminate physical evidence before returning to the city. Detectives lay out the receipts. The payment at the cheese shop went through at 9:55 in the morning. The shoe purchase was recorded at 12:11 in the afternoon. The distance between those two stores is exactly 54 miles. On a normal highway route, that drive should take about 47 minutes at a steady pace, but the timing does not add up. Between those two stops, Chris has an unexplained gap, a full 90 minutes that is not documented anywhere. Investigators take that unexplained 90-minute gap and plot it onto a map of Wisconsin. When they calculate how far someone could have traveled during that window, the search area expands across a large stretch of rural countryside. Within that radius are countless isolated turnoffs, farm roads, empty fields, and dead-end gravel lanes, places where someone could leave behind almost anything without attracting attention. And at this point, investigators believe they finally have enough pieces of the puzzle to reconstruct what may have happened that night. Let's go back to the night between Thursday and Friday and follow the sequence investigators ultimately presented. No speculation, just the actions they believe took place. We're back on the 18th floor of the luxury apartment building. Kelly and Chris enter the apartment. The evening unfolds much like many others before it, with alcohol and prohibited substances involved. At some point, Chris initiates the same high-risk intimate activity involving breath restriction that had reportedly become part of his routine. But this time, investigators believe the situation goes wrong. According to the prosecution's theory, he fails to stop in time, crosses a critical line, and Kelly dies in the apartment. Imagine the situation he suddenly finds himself in. He's inside a heavily monitored high-rise building surrounded by security cameras, and now he's facing a crisis that could expose everything. Investigators believe the initial panic quickly gives way to calculation. What follows, according to their theory, is a deliberate effort to remove evidence and avoid detection. They believe Kelly has moved into the guest bathroom. Investigators later argued that strong cleaning products, including bleach, were used throughout the room in an attempt to remove traces of what had happened. Then comes the biggest challenge. How do you move something out of a secured building without attracting attention? According to investigators, Chris removes the heavy waterproof shower curtain from its rings and wraps Kelly inside it. Then his attention turns to the large golf travel bag that had been sitting in the hallway for weeks. Prosecutors believe he forces the wrapped contents into the rigid case. The bag is not large enough to fit comfortably, so investigators argue that considerable force would have been required to make everything fit and close the zipper. Friday morning arrives. At approximately 7:20, investigators believe the removal process begins. Smaller items that could potentially contain evidence, decorative towels and bath mats, are allegedly carried into the hallway and dropped down the building's trash chute. Then comes the larger burden. Investigators believe Chris transports the golf case down to the underground garage where his black Audi is parked. He rolls the bag toward the vehicle and opens the trunk. And then something remarkable happens. At the exact moment investigators believe the heavy case is being loaded into the trunk, another sport utility vehicle slowly passes through the garage. For a few critical seconds, it blocks the view of the surveillance camera. The loading area disappears from sight. And the most important moment of the entire sequence is left hidden from the camera's view. Saturday morning marks the final stage of the timeline investigators would later present in court. With the large travel bag in the trunk, Chris gets behind the wheel and leaves Milwaukee. After driving dozens of miles into the countryside, he turns off the highway and heads down a remote gravel road known as Inland Road. According to prosecutors, he carries the heavy load into a wooded area just off the road. There, he opens the case and leaves Kelly's body hidden among the dense brush. The golf bag itself, along with the shower curtain investigators believe had been used earlier, does not stay behind. Prosecutors argued that he takes both items with him when he leaves, intending to dispose of them somewhere else along the route home. Back on the highway, another stop appears in the timeline. Chris pulls into a sporting goods store. Investigators believed that after spending time in a remote wooded area, his shoes may have carried soil and other trace material. Inside the store, he purchases a brand new pair of sneakers. The transaction is completed, he changes into the new shoes, and the old pair disappears from the story. Then he gets back in his Audi and continues with the rest of his day. His destination is a planned dinner with Megan's parents, people who, at that moment, had no idea what investigators would later uncover. By all outward appearances, it was just another ordinary weekend. The carefully crafted image was still intact, but it wouldn't last. Accountability arrived in two stages. First came the charges connected to the prohibited substances and the disturbing material discovered on his electronic devices. For those offenses, Chris received a 19-year prison sentence. Then, in 2015, after Kelly's remains were identified, prosecutors moved forward with a much larger case. At trial, the defense focused heavily on one issue. Because of the condition of the remains and the amount of time that had passed, medical experts could not establish a precise cause of death. The defense argued that this uncertainty created reasonable doubt, but prosecutors approached the case differently. Piece by piece, they assembled the broader picture: the surveillance footage, the timeline, the alerts from the detection dogs, the missing items from the apartment, the unexplained trip into rural Wisconsin, the blind spots in the security camera coverage. Individually, each detail raised questions. Together, prosecutors argued they formed a single, consistent narrative. During the proceedings, Kelly's devastated father addressed the court and described Chris as a serial predator. In the end, the jury sided with the prosecution. Chris received an additional 31 years in prison. Combined with his earlier sentence, the total reached 50 years behind bars. And that is where this story ultimately ends. A double life that appeared polished and successful on the surface eventually collapsed under the weight of its own secrets.
Support us by liking and subscribing. Share your theories in the comments. Until next time, stay vigilant.